The train engine growled softly as steam filled the cold morning air, and the last call for passengers echoed across the small station. The young woman hurried toward the train with a single worn bag in her hand, her heart beating fast. She had done this many times before, leave quietly before anyone could ask questions. Running had always been easier than staying. But just as she reached the steps of the train, a tall cowboy stepped in front of her path. His coat moved in the wind, and his calm eyes held a strange seriousness. He was known in town as the quiet millionaire ranch owner, a man who rarely spoke to anyone. Yet now he stood there, looking directly at her. In a low, steady voice he said, "You can go, but not until you know what family feels like." The words stopped her cold. No one had ever said something like that to her before. For a moment, the entire station felt silent, and she wondered why this stranger cared enough to stop her. Months earlier, the young woman had arrived in the small western town with nothing but a worn bag and tired eyes that carried more pain than her age should have held. She rented a tiny room above the old bakery and found work wherever she could, cleaning tables, carrying supplies, and keeping her head down. She spoke politely, but never shared anything about her past. The townspeople noticed her quiet nature, yet no one truly knew her story. She avoided friendships, never stayed long in conversations, and always looked ready to leave at any moment. It was clear she trusted no one. However, there was one person who quietly paid attention. The wealthy ranch owner, a calm and respected cowboy, had seen the sadness she tried so hard to hide behind her polite smile. From the first day she stepped into town, he noticed the way she watched people carefully, as if expecting disappointment. Something about her silent struggle stayed in his mind, and he could not ignore it. However, the quiet attention of the ranch owner was not the only thing people in town noticed, and slowly whispers about the young woman began to travel from the general store to the diner and across the dusty streets where curious eyes followed her steps. Some said she had run away from trouble. Others believed she had once trusted the wrong people and lost everything. And a few simply decided that a stranger who stayed silent must be hiding something dark. She heard the murmurs when she walked past the tables in the cafe, saw the questioning looks when conversations suddenly stopped, and felt the invisible wall growing around her again. The careful life she had tried to build in that town began to feel fragile, like a glass that could break with one careless touch. That evening, the wind moved slowly through the empty street as she finished her work and stepped outside into the fading light. The sky was turning deep orange behind the distant hills, yet instead of feeling peaceful, the town suddenly felt too small, too watchful, and too dangerous for someone who had spent years protecting her heart by never staying anywhere long. She walked back to her small room above the bakery with heavy steps, the wooden floor creaking softly under her boots as she closed the door behind her. The room looked the same as always, a narrow bed beside the window, a small table, and the single bag she had brought months earlier, the only thing in her life that truly belonged to her. For a long moment, she stood still, staring at the bag as if it were waiting for her decision. Staying meant answering questions she was not ready to face, trusting people she barely knew, and risking the same disappointment that had followed her in every town before. Leaving meant loneliness again, long roads, unfamiliar places, and another attempt to start over somewhere no one knew her name. Her chest tightened as the memories she kept buried pushed against her thoughts, reminding her why she had promised herself never to stay long enough to care about anyone. Slowly, she sat on the edge of the bed and placed both hands over her face, breathing deeply as the quiet room filled with the distant sound of horses and wagon wheels outside. The ranch owner's calm eyes briefly crossed her mind, the way he had once spoken to her with unexpected kindness when she delivered supplies to the ranch house. Yet even that memory could not silence the fear that always returned when people began asking questions. The safest choice had always been the same. Leave before the past catches up. Leave before someone gets close enough to break the fragile peace she had built. As the town lights slowly disappeared outside the window and night settled across the silent streets, she finally stood up with quiet determination. She placed a few folded clothes into the worn bag, tied it closed, and rested it beside the door. Before sunrise the next morning, the young woman walked alone through the cold mist toward the train station, her steps steady even though her heart felt heavier with every second. believing that disappearing once again was the only way to protect herself from a pain she had survived before but never wanted to feel again. The cold mist still covered the quiet station as she stepped onto the wooden platform, her worn bag resting against her leg while the distant rumble of the approaching train slowly grew louder through the silent valley. A lonely lantern swung gently above the ticket window, casting soft golden light across the empty benches, and for a moment the entire place felt frozen between night and morning. She kept her eyes on the iron tracks stretching toward the horizon, telling herself that once the train arrived, everything would become easier again because distance had always been her safest escape. The station master had not even arrived yet, and only the distant whistle of the train announced that her chance to disappear was only minutes away. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag as memories she tried to bury pushed quietly through her thoughts, reminding her why she had learned to leave before anyone could truly see the pain she carried. She believed no one in that town would notice she was gone, that the dusty streets would look the same, the cafe tables would fill with the same voices, and the ranch lands would stretch under the same wide sky without her presence. But just as the sharp cry of the train whistle echoed across the cold morning air, another sound cut through the silence, the powerful rhythm of a horse galloping fast across the frozen road. She turned slightly, her heart suddenly beating harder as the sound grew closer, and within seconds a tall horse appeared through the thin mist, its breath rising like smoke as it stopped near the edge of the platform. Sitting firmly in the saddle was the quiet ranch owner, whose calm presence always carried a strange strength that people in town respected without question. The millionaire cowboy swung down from the horse with steady movements, his boots landing against the wooden boards with quiet certainty. He did not look angry or rushed, yet there was a seriousness in his eyes that made the moment feel heavier than the cold air surrounding them. The young woman instinctively stepped back, surprised that he had followed her there, and confusion mixed with quiet fear as she wondered how he even knew she was leaving. For a few seconds neither of them spoke while the sound of the approaching train rolled closer across the valley. Then the cowboy walked forward slowly, stopping only a few steps away from her path to the train. His voice remained calm and low, yet every word carried quiet conviction when he finally spoke. He told her she did not have to run anymore. The simple sentence hung in the cold air between them, as if it carried more meaning than the words themselves. She shook her head slightly, trying to move past him, insisting that leaving was the only thing she knew how to do, the only choice that had ever protected her from disappointment and betrayal. But the cowboy did not move aside. Instead, he looked directly at her with steady patience, not with anger or force, only with a calm determination that made the moment feel impossible to ignore. The train whistle sounded again, louder now, echoing through the station as the ground beneath the tracks began to tremble softly. Yet somehow the approaching departure no longer felt like the most important thing happening on that platform. The young woman stood there facing him, realizing for the first time that someone had finally followed her not to stop her freedom, but because he believed she deserved a life where she did not have to keep running forever. The young woman forced herself to step forward, hoping to pass him before her courage disappeared, but the cowboy spoke again in a quiet voice that carried more honesty than authority, and something in his tone made her slow down despite the approaching train roaring closer. Behind them, he did not block her path with anger or demand that she stay. Instead, he simply said that running might feel safe for a while, yet it never truly heals the loneliness a person carries inside. She frowned slightly, confused by the calm certainty in his words, because strangers usually judged her or asked questions she refused to answer. But this man was speaking as if he already understood the silence she hid behind. The cold wind moved across the platform while the train's engine thundered somewhere beyond the bend in the tracks, yet the cowboy remained steady, his eyes focused on her with a quiet sincerity that made the moment strangely personal. After a brief pause, he told her something no one in town had ever heard from him before. He said he knew exactly what it felt like to grow up without a real family. The statement caught her completely off guard, and she looked at him again, this time with curiosity replacing the guarded distance in her expression. The wealthy ranch owner that everyone respected suddenly seemed different, less like the powerful man who owned half the land around the valley, and more like someone who carried his own invisible scars. He explained slowly that many years earlier, he had been a lost boy wandering through towns not much different from this one, working wherever he could and sleeping in barns or empty sheds because there had been no place that truly belonged to him. People often saw the ranch, the land, and the success he eventually built, yet very few understood how empty his life had once felt before he found the courage to stop running from every connection. The young woman listened in silence while the truth in his voice slowly reached the guarded parts of her heart she had protected for years. He told her that surviving alone might teach a person how to stay strong, but it also builds walls that become difficult to lower when someone finally offers genuine kindness. For a moment, she looked down at the wooden boards beneath her boots, unsure how to respond because no one had ever spoken to her with such understanding without expecting something in return. The train whistle screamed loudly again, echoing across the valley as the engine finally appeared along the tracks, its heavy wheels shaking the ground beneath the platform, yet neither of them moved toward it. The cowboy did not beg her to stay or accuse her of making a mistake. Instead, he simply admitted that when he first noticed the sadness behind her careful smile, he recognized the same loneliness he once carried inside himself. That was why he had come to the station that morning, not to stop her freedom, but to tell her something he wished someone had once told him during his own restless years. A person does not always need to face life alone. Sometimes the hardest step is not leaving, but allowing someone to show that belonging somewhere is still possible even after a lifetime of running. The powerful engine finally rolled into the station with a deep metallic rumble, releasing clouds of steam that drifted across the platform like fog. Yet the young woman remained still as the cowboy's quiet words continued to echo in her mind. Passengers began stepping down while others climbed aboard, their voices mixing with the sharp clatter of boots against the wooden boards, but the noise felt distant, as if the world around her had slowed. She looked once toward the open train door and then back at the calm figure standing before her, trying to decide whether leaving would truly protect her heart or simply continue the endless circle she had followed for years. The cowboy seemed to sense the conflict inside her, yet instead of urging her to stay, he took a slow step back and spoke again with gentle patience. He told her she was free to board the train if that was the choice she believed was right, but before she decided, he wanted to offer something simple. He invited her to visit the ranch one last time before she left town. There was no pressure in his voice and no promise that she needed to remain after seeing it. He only suggested that she spend a few hours there, just long enough to understand what he meant when he spoke about belonging somewhere. The young woman hesitated, surprised by the unexpected offer because most people would have tried to convince her with strong arguments or emotional persuasion. Yet he was giving her the freedom to walk away whenever she wished. The train conductor called for final boarding while the whistle blew again, a sharp signal that the departure was only moments away. And for a second, she felt the familiar instinct telling her to climb the steps and disappear, like she had done so many times before. But another quieter thought rose inside her mind, reminding her that she had never once stayed long enough to see what might happen if she trusted someone's kindness. Slowly, she stepped away from the train door and lifted her bag again, turning her gaze toward the waiting horse beside the platform where the cowboy stood watching calmly, without triumph or expectation. The train doors closed behind her with a heavy sound, and within seconds the engine began moving down the tracks, carrying the chance to leave farther into the distance. She felt a strange mixture of fear and curiosity as the cowboy guided the horse gently along the quiet road leading toward the ranch, while the pale morning sunlight slowly spread across the wide valley. The ride took them past open fields where workers were beginning their day, and when they finally reached the large wooden ranch house, she noticed something that caught her attention immediately. Instead of the cold silence she expected from such a wealthy place, the yard was alive with warm voices, laughter, and people greeting one another like a close community rather than distant employees. A young boy ran across the yard chasing a playful dog, while an older woman waved from the porch with a welcoming smile that carried no suspicion or judgment. The young woman stood there quietly, watching the simple scene unfold, realizing that the atmosphere felt different from any place she had known before. No one looked at her like a stranger they needed to question. Instead, they greeted her kindly, as if her presence was natural. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar but deeply comforting, the quiet possibility that a place could exist where people truly cared whether she stayed or left. She stood quietly in the ranch yard while the warm sound of laughter and friendly voices surrounded her, and for the first time in many years the tight fear inside her chest slowly began to fade. No one questioned her past, no one demanded explanations, and no one treated her like a stranger who did not belong. The cowboy watched her calmly from the porch, not expecting anything from her except honesty with herself. In that peaceful moment, she finally understood something she had been too afraid to accept before. Running had protected her from pain, but it had also kept her away from the very thing her heart needed most. Slowly, she placed her worn bag on the ground and looked around at the welcoming faces, realizing she no longer felt the urge to leave. The train had already disappeared beyond the hills, yet for the first time in her life, she was not losing something by staying. She was finally finding the home she never believed existed.